Exchange, you've got web app companions, we got OneNote, we got public Skype, we got the apps along the top in terms of how we access and consume the data, we got AAD. There's just a whole bunch of different technological components in there. And this is a high-level architecture diagram of Microsoft Teams, just to kind of give you a feel for how much, the breadth and depth of the solution. So we really need to understand what our components are before we able to kind of effectively secure it, is what I would say.
And I think a prime example of this, actually, that I've seen with, with some organisations that we work with is they'll want to roll Teams out, but they'll just say, well, we're not using SharePoint, and they struggle to understand this concept that these two are intrinsically linked, and that if they're rolling Teams out, they need to put the governance in place from a SharePoint perspective as well. I think that's not so much recently, but that's a conversation I think we've had several times over the years, isn't it, Luke?
Well, I think people are getting more on board with, you're going to go for the whole hog, as it were. You're going to switch on a bunch of these services, light them up. Whereas previously you had people that weren't quite ready to migrate to SharePoint or OneDrive or whatever it may be. They would typically turn these pieces off and add them as and when they need them. But the way I look at it is you want to secure the whole piece. So let's look at that and figure out what we need to do. All right, so next up is the technical components. Now, I've kind of put a user spin, the ones that are more user-centric. The more technical ones I'm probably going to run through tomorrow. Typically, I'll give some recommendations around what the technology is and how it might work. The other thing I would say is Zoe's probably going to interrupt me and ask about the usability. So that's kind of the security versus usability piece coming in. Now, I think one of my favorites when I'm talking about securing Microsoft Teams, I have a real passion for security and identity. So a lot of stuff you're going to see here is going to be typically identity driven or security driven. And I would say, look, I'm going to call out when they have a licensing implication is the important thing. For me, I'm going to keep them at a high level and try to keep it more user-centric, the technologies I'm talking about. Now, the first one really is Azure AD conditional access. I think the first thing I would say here is, look, guys, it's quite basic, but if you haven't got MFA, switch it on is probably the first thing I would say. 99% of attacks can be prevented just by switching on MFA. But conditional access, in a nutshell, is the who, what, why, when, where. And it's kind of simple. If this, then that statements of how you can access and consume your 365 data. So what we really want to look at in terms of a BYOD, users want to access their data from wherever they're working from. They kind of want to make sure that we can match the conditions that we set forth. So it's really the kind of the location, the device state, the user group. Are these people entitled to kind of access your data? And it's really to kind of keep the bad actors out. And this one is one of my favorite technologies. The recommendations I'll quickly go through off the top of my head. Make sure you've got MFA switched on. I would make sure that you kind of, an easy one is to allow and block lists. So if you are only working from the UK or if you're only working from Germany, something like that, why not restrict it to that and just allow access from there? You're going to cut down a whole bunch of traffic and kind of issues around that. Obviously, the usability side, where you come in, is people take vacations and flipping it on its head. You might want to make sure that you could just do a block list. And typically, I would recommend blocking Iran, China, Russia, and I think North Korea are the four that the NCSC have at the moment in terms of what you want to get on your block list, basically. But the key... And
just on this before you carry on, Luke. So, if we think back to the start when we talked about, our users through the pandemic who've just been working at their kitchen table on their their BYOD device. From a user experience perspective, we put this in place.
Yep.
What's that going to look like for them?
So it's a good question, and I think it can have varying implications depending on what we want to do with the technology. I think for me, the number one thing is if you're not used to use the MFA, you might have to use an authenticator app, which to me, a push notification is really not the end of the world in terms of an impact, in terms of usability. The ones that might get a bit more touchy are when you start using device-driven controls, using Microsoft Intune, for example. I think the thing here that you might have is you might start locking down BYOD devices and limiting what they can do. So you could access or you could limit access to, I don't know, high-value targets, high-value systems with this. So that might have a bit more of an impact. But what I would suggest is we can also look at layering on different technologies to better protect the content that's stored within 365. So it may be you just want to make sure that they have a compliant device or they're coming from the right country in this scenario. And you can keep it fairly usable in that scenario. Did that
brilliant.
One?
Yep, yeah, brilliant. Carry on.
Cool. I think, the other recommendations, the allow deny list is quite an easy one. And I think that nails a lot of the traffic. I think the other ones I like typically are going to be things around device controls is the really cool one. So if you're using Intune, for example, you can lock it down to just devices. But again, you're getting more highly secured at that point, and it's going to be less usable for BYOD users in that scenario. So I'd probably give that one a miss until you're ready to rock and roll with it. All right, next one. Okay, this one's pretty rocking. I like this one a lot from a usability perspective is the thing. It's not overly technical is the thing. I like this. It's a feature in Azure AD Premium P2. And what we're really looking at is access reviews. So how do we kind of manage membership to teams on an ongoing basis is the thing. And we don't really want this to be an IT admin function, is what I would say. Us, IT security professionals, IT professionals, we don't really want to manage membership for users. So I think for me, we really want to make sure that we can use this and put it back in the hands of the users is the thing. They're going to know who needs access to their data. And I think this is a very usable solution is the one.
I think for me, it's not even that we don't want to manage this. I think we don't know. Yeah, we don't know whether these people have got a right to access that data or not. And I haven't got time to be going and chasing them down and asking them. So
I think, yeah, spot on. If I pick up someone's team, I'd have no idea, who should have access and who shouldn't. I think for me, what we really want to do is be able to create an access review, an ongoing access review. We're going to then have a cycle where reviewers can give feedback around that. After that, it's going to reply those results. Now, the really cool thing that we can do here, and probably my favorite use of the technology, is we can have system recommendations based on usage. And, basically Azure AD Access Reviews can recommend who they think should have access, and it can present us a list of these are the people that have used the team or the group, and this is who we think you should keep in there. We can have it self-review, we can have reviews on owners, so it gives us a whole bunch of different options out there. And I think for me, I know when we used to do a previous company I used to work, we used to do ISO audits and the like, and you had to go through and review the membership of these things each and every year as a manual task. This helps automate it and make it so much easier, is what I would say. And the key thing here is we're cutting off access to people that no longer need it, is the thing. So for me, this is a nice usable solution. It increases the security by cutting down people that shouldn't have access.
And licensing?
Licensing is the Azure AD Premium P2, so they get you there, unfortunately. But it's well worth it, in my opinion. All right, cool. Okay, this one is absolutely awesome. This is so cool. Again, this is entitlement management. So access reviews is on a single group, but imagine we did this at a greater scale. So you can bundle applications, we can bundle teams, we can bundle SharePoint sites, we can bundle them together in what we call an access package. And this is really quite powerful stuff because we can have it so, the common, Zoe, you take away on the kind of typical use case on this one, starters, leavers, movers.
Yeah, probably like the last 2 or 3 organisations I've worked at, even before where I am now, I think that whole starters, movers, leavers process is just a nightmare. And actually, so from a new starter perspective, to be able to just assign someone to a HR package and they get access to all the HR teams and sites and apps and whatever else they need, slapping my thigh again.
Sorry, I think I might have to take the clicker soon.
The really powerful thing, though, actually, is where you've got people moving around an organisation, because this is one that we've. I think a lot of people have kind of struggled to get their head around, because when you're at an organisation, you might be in HR, and then through the course of your employment, you'll join some things, some teams and stuff like that are kind of separate to your job. So you might be in the women's network or the cycling club, or some cross-functional projects that you'd still be involved in if you move to a different part of the business. And from an IT perspective, and actually even a manager's perspective, it can be really difficult to say, right, so they need to lose access to all this stuff over here and get access to all this, and it becomes really messy to unpick. So what tends to happen is people don't unpick it, and people will move to like a different part of the business, and they'll carry on having access to stuff from their old job that they shouldn't have access to anymore. So with entitlement management, you can literally just remove the HR package and stick a finance one on, or whatever different part of the business they've got, and that automatically makes sure that people kind of keep the non-work stuff, the teams and things that they need access to, but they automatically lose all of the confidential things that maybe they shouldn't be anywhere near.
And I think it's not overly technical, the stuff we're talking about here. I think the important thing is, look, we're increasing security by removing access to resources that they shouldn't have. I think on top of that, the key one for me in terms of access reviews and entitlement management is we can use this technology for guest users is the thing. So we can specify guest-only access reviews, or we could use entitlement management to manage entitlements for guests. And we can run those on teams to basically strip out guests after a period of time. And to me, the other really cool one here that they introduced very recently was I think it was a separation of duties. So you can have entitlement management. Say if I'm in the sales team, I shouldn't be able to access financial data, for example. So it's a separation of duties, and we can use entitlement management for that. And that's not necessarily teams. It's just a cool feature that they chucked in recently. I figured I'd flag it. think we've gone back.
Nope.
I think we've gone. There we go. Okay, this is an interesting one, a nice simple one. I think this is one that we always come across as the thing. So by default, when you get a new 365 tenant, you're going to have the ability to generate Microsoft 365 groups by default is the thing. Now, what we would typically recommend is, if you went with kind of the defaults, you can, I guess, rapidly grow the amount of teams you have available to your users, and the amount of content that you have to secure is probably the key thing. I think we would typically recommend having some sort of governance or control around who can create teams. The reason being is because once they're out there, they can inherit the default settings of having guest access open, and it makes it very easy to expose data out to kind of the wider world is probably the best way of putting it. I think we would typically recommend some sort of governance control around who can create 365 groups and teams for that matter. I think even if it's a simple kind of workflow or Power Automate and it's self-approving, you can put those kind of governance guardrails in place when it starts off as the important thing.
Yeah, and I think if we come back to one of the early points around, people wanting to be sure that you've got the right settings applied and the right people having access, this is the thing that can do that, because it can apply the governance at that point of creation. Now, like Luke said, we do normally recommend self-approving for this, because you don't want to get in the way of people collaborating and being able to work together. You just want to make sure that they're doing it in a really safe way.
Mm-hmm. And again, I think it comes back to those use cases at the beginning. I want to work with, whoever I want to work with. I want to make sure it's secure. And I think we would typically just recommend, some gates to make sure that they're doing that in an appropriate way. And this is one of the key ones, because if you let people just create groups without any sort of control, you're going to end up in a mess. All right, this is a nice, easy one. And I think, again, it's user-centric. It's not really something, again, we're shifting responsibility away from IT admins and moving it more to users is the key. And what we're really looking at is 365 groups and teams by extension is an expiration policy on them. So this is another easy one. This is an Azure AD Premium P1, but the important thing here is it's checking to see if groups are still used. So teams, are they still being used? It will do an automatic check and ensure that people are making use of these things. They're still in use. Otherwise, it's going to look to retire them after a period of time that you can control. So you could say, after 6 months of inactivity, I want to shut this team down. And I think for me, we would recommend piloting this with specific groups initially and kind of just make sure that they're happy is the thing. We'd also just make sure you set up a kind of a list of teams that you might not want this to apply to is the important thing. But for me, you're clearing out the old rubbish or taking out the trash, really. And it's an easy way of doing it. It's system driven.
And it simplifies the user experience as well, doesn't it? It makes it easier for people to find what they're looking for if they don't have a giant list of teams.
And you've got a great point there. I completely forgot. So say you haven't used a team in 6 months, 12 months, whatever it may be, it's going to send you an email and ask you to renew it if you want to keep it. So again, we're moving that responsibility from IT administrators to basically end users and increasing hopefully the usability of the solution. All right, cool. This one's a good one. So guest access is a hot topic typically. Certainly in the work that I've done, we've worked with a lot of local authorities. It's do I want to open up teams and how do I want to open it up is the key. Now, again, coming back to that garish chart that I showed you earlier with the crazy colors, I think the one that we wanted to avoid was kind of users circumventing kind of controls that we put in place. So the recommendation for me would be, rather than basically having users go outside and use third-party services, I think for me, we would say switch on guest access. Allow you guys to use guests within Teams is the thing. It's going to increase usability, and it also keeps that collaboration within your tenant is the important thing.
I think that's a really key one for me, and this is something I always recommend to colleagues and customers. If you have the opportunity, you want that team creating in your environment, because you are then in control of removing access. If you're collaborating in someone else's space, they can turn the tap off at any time. They can remove your account. You have no control over that. So it's 100% the right thing to do to get this set up and control the spaces that people work in.
Mm-hmm. And I think, let's get them in. Let's get them happening in our thing. We've got the connected channels coming up soon as the one. Now, I don't know how that's going to work, but at the moment, guest access, get them in your tenant. You control that. We can govern it using the built-in 365 tools. So there's quite a number of things that we can use here to better manage our guests. And I think for me, there's a few things. So, and it kind of comes back to the slides that we showed previously. But one is when you're creating these groups, do you want them all to have guests in or not? We can control that on a team by team basis. So who should have guests and who shouldn't? I think on top of that, we can use things such as the access reviews, entitlement management to better manage, I guess, users. We can use expiration to get rid of kind of shared areas that no longer need to exist. I think we can also use the allow and deny list at Azure AD level, and that can say, we want to work with people from, let's say, zoewilson.co.uk, but we might not want to work with people from hotmail.com. Now, that's entirely on a business by business, how you configure the allow and deny list. Most people are happy just to deny, and some people are happy just to allow. Again, it's very similar to the one that we spoke about previously, but it's another one to kind of think through. And I think, the key message here is enable it, switch it on. You would rather have it taking place in your tenant than somewhere else is the key. All right, cool. And that previous part was about identity and access management. I think for me, one of my favorite things in terms of managing the content. So we saw on the shared responsibility model, where kind of responsible content really is the key, content classification and management. And for me, we have teams, we can control teams, we can control the security there. How do we control the content within teams? And for me, there's kind of two different ways of doing it. We got sensitivity labels. What is a sensitivity label? I'm sure all of you have come across them at least by now. It's a tag that's customizable, clear text, and it lives with the document is the key thing. So if a document moves out of a team and it goes somewhere else, you could email it, you can copy it on a USB stick. We don't really care. It's going to come with that is the important thing. So I can apply things. Once we apply this tag, it basically becomes the basis for applying and enforcing data protection policies. So we can encrypt the document, we can watermark it, we can apply access for a period of time. Is really quite powerful stuff is the thing. And I think what I'd recommend is, look, sensitivity labels, you can see it up here. We've gone with some of the default ones from Microsoft is the thing. Public sector clients I work with, we often have a different set of tags, but I think we can apply them at the document level. I'll talk about it at the team and group level in a moment, but for me, this is better protecting the content within teams is the thing. Users kind of get, it's a relatively easy one, I would say, that we can roll out and basically have our users start classifying their documents and better protecting them. So it doesn't matter if someone is to exfiltrate that data, it's going to be protected at the document level.
And from a user perspective, so, I'm a user, I'm working in teams, I've got some documents. How does this work? Okay,
good question. So it depends on kind of the settings that we want to mandate. We can have a default label so we don't have users worrying about that. Really what it's going to be is we can mandate a label and we can basically enforce our users to apply a classification to a document, whether it's a spreadsheet, PowerPoint, whatever it may be. It could be an email. The thing is, it's going to pop up and just prompt them and say, classify your document. We can say it's, confidential, highly confidential, or it could be public. And we don't really care about the document. It's not something that would do any harm if it came out. So once they choose that, we can apply different protection policies on that, encrypt it, watermark it, like I said previously. And that's really the impact on the user. It's going to be prompting them for labels and classify that content.
Brilliant.
And now this is the really cool one for teams, certainly. We've got sensitivity labels at the container level is the really cool one. And this is really powerful stuff. So you can take the labels that you have, or you can create a new set. I would typically recommend creating a new set for your teams. So it may be just private, public. And what happens is when we change the sensitivity label on a team, it's going to change settings on that team, which is really powerful stuff. So we can change it so it could basically enable guest access or disable guest access. It could enable conditional access features so we can better control BYOD devices that access this. But the really cool thing is it's quite easy for your users to kind of understand, is this a private team? Is it a public team? The content within, is it confidential or not? And the idea here is that we can better put kind of self-service for our end users or owners of teams to better control how their kind of content and area is protected. Okay, yeah, this one's quite easy. Sensitivity labels, recommendations. I think the thing here is what we're saying is, look, we would recommend getting sensitivity labels out. They're built into 365. I would make use of kind of the document level ones and also the container level ones. I think for me, the key thing is we would recommend rolling out a pilot by pilot basis. I would basically do it to a set of users. We can scope it. So you can have different labels to different sets of users if you want. But for me, I would have a pilot group that I roll document labels out. And I'll also do a different set for kind of containers is the key. So I don't think documents and containers typically have the same set of labels, but I would recommend getting them out there. It increases security, it allows better self-service, it allows our users to protect documents at the document level and also teams at the team level. And to be honest, it's not overly, it's more a usability one than a harsh security control. So again, for me, it's an easy win. And that's why I kind of put it in today.
Brilliant, thank you. All right, so onto the last slide then. So, we've talked about some of the technical components that you can use to secure teams and what this might mean from an end user. And I think with some of the developments that Microsoft have made, it's not necessarily about usability versus security. It is possible to have both. It's possible to roll out a Teams deployment that's really usable, that lets people work in a natural way, that is secured and protected as well. But unfortunately, there is a bit of a cost that comes with that, because a lot of the great features that that kind of Luke's touched on, and some of the features we'll go through tomorrow as well, are in one of the premium licensing SKUs. So we're not going to go through all of this kind of point by point. I think we'll just pull key things out, but we just wanted to kind of demonstrate what you can do within each of the licensing levels.
Yeah, and I think for me, like Zoe said, it's kind of a gotcha, our session really. So you can be in that box where it's highly usable and highly secure, but I think the problem is you're going to have to probably pay for it, is the thing. You're probably going to need the higher license levels, is the thing. So without it, what we can do though is we would recommend kind of teams with E3, teams with governance. I think the thing is you can kind of supplement a lot of this stuff with kind of automations, really, is the thing. So we can build basically a provisioning process using Power Automate. We can report on guest users using Azure AD, Power Automate, Azure AD applications. You can try to best supplement some of the technology that we saw. So access reviews, entitlement management, conditional access is there, but you're not going to have kind of I would guess what is it that I'm looking for? It's basically intelligence to understand risk signals when you're signing in is the important thing. So
I think it's some of the kind of automation and scale, isn't it? You can kind of develop point solutions that help address simple problems. But one of the benefits for me, I think, of like the E5 feature set or Azure AD P2 and some of the other components is the fact that it's all integrated and automated and gives you that real defense in depth, which as an IT admin allows you to scale out more comfortably, I think, and with a bit more confidence. Yeah,
because some of these I think would be near on impossible. It would be very tricky. You'd spend a whole heap of time building stuff. So if I was going to go try to build an information barrier, or I was going to build automated classification on labels, you're going to spend a lot of time writing a lot of code, is what I would say, to kind of replicate that functionality. So
you might as well just pay for it.
Exactly. In that instance, I think that's adding to your point. It's all integrated. Yeah. It's ready to go, and it allows you to scale up more quickly. I think some of this stuff would take me a very long time to build. So yeah, that's the kind of gotcha with this one, unfortunately, that it's all there. It's just got to pay for it is the problem.
Cool. All right. So I actually think we did all right for time there as well, Luke.
Well, we appreciate we were running a bit short with time, so we kind of.
Any questions?
Any questions?
Yeah, go please. What is? Sorry, this is my first session. What does the cube do?
It's a speaker.
It's got a microphone.
Oh, really? Oh, awesome.
Sorry. I'm just on the E3 and E5 piece.
Yeah.
Is it possible to start getting a two-tier sort of AD and Office 365 system on the go with Teams? So you've got your finance, sales, investments, E5, and then you've got your stick users on E3.
I'll be perfectly honest. I think you can, but the big gotcha here, you ready for this one? Is that when you start adding these premium, E5 security and compliance, we add premium Azure AD Premium P2, it switches on for everyone. Yeah. So the big gotcha there is kind of an honesty policy is the thing. So as soon as you add one of those licenses to your tenant, it's basically across the board.
So it's the old school CALs then. You've bought 100 but actually using 1,000, and Microsoft just let you do it.
I think it's a challenge as well, because say you've got like this two-tier license system, and you might have a team where you've got some of the premium features, and then if you add someone in who's on the lower licensing level, like Luke said, they're going to be able to benefit from that, but they may not be licensed properly. So it introduces a bit of complexity. Sorry, go on.
The one I can recommend in the two-tier, there's a few different things. So access reviews works well in a two-tier system because you only have to license the owners or the reviewers.
Right.
So you could just do 10, 20 people and they review the teams. Yeah, that's a nice, easy one. You don't have to review everyone. If you do self-approve or self-review, you have to license everyone. That's the gotcha. The other one I like is Azure AD Privileged Identity Management. I haven't called out here specifically, but for elevating your privileges just in time. Again, you just need to have IT admins licensed and any reviewers on that. So you can kind of do the Azure AD Premium stuff. The other ones you might be able to do probably are some conditional access stuff and the identity protection. You could probably scope that to a set of users. Unfortunately, the ones that Zoe was just alluding to, the big issue we've got there are things like the automated labeling and sensitivity labels at the E5 SKU. The problem you're going to have is that automatic labeling is going to happen across the board. I don't think we can restrict it to any set of users, and that's where they're probably going to get you, is the thing. Because we're going to say, I want to apply these tags across the board.
Yes, when you say they're going to get you, do they just add that onto your invoice?
No, I have no idea, you know. To be honest, my tip of the day, if you want to play with this stuff, go add one license in your own tenant, and that's what I do. I play with all the stuff. They never come to get me. I've got like 5 users. So I don't know, I think is the honest answer. We've never come up, or I certainly have never come across a situation yet where they've switched it on. I know some local authorities have switched on these features and they've had never a bother of it, is the thing. So I know someone switched on conditional access and they had the identity protection on for, you know, the whole people. They've done it with PIM, because as soon as you add that license, everyone started getting access to the features and using them. Now, I still don't think they have the licenses, is the honest answer. And Microsoft have never bothered. I don't know if there's anything that they do to report on it, is the interesting thing.
It will make for an interesting conversation if you were audited.
Yeah, I haven't come across it yet, but it's a bit of a gotcha.
So I could say, this guy said at a conference, it should be fine.
Well, yeah, it's all him, not my advice.
Well, I mean, hey, look, the honesty piece is out there for anyone to know. As soon as you add the license, you get the features. So why not do it? Why not take advantage of it if you're learning, is what I would say. I think the other thing is most people, and the other big gotcha is typically most people buy one license of everything to lock in the price. So pretty much every tenant I go to has one of every license. And that means everyone's got these features. So the problem is I speak to people quite often and running the systems and they don't even know they're using PIM, for example. Now I know I haven't called it out here, but they don't have a clue that they're actually using PIM is the problem. They don't even understand that they've used it because they've defaulted, they've got this one license that they purchased to lock the price in, and suddenly all these features light up.
I think that's something we see quite a bit, isn't it? You get people who've kind of managed on-prem systems, so they've had the same infrastructure for like 10 years, and then when they start managing all this stuff, they just don't understand the impact, I think, of switching some of this stuff on. So
I think there is a way of making 2 tiers work. I think you have to pick and choose your features, though, unfortunately, the way that they've kind of done it. So PIM, I would do access reviews. Maybe entitlement management. I don't know off the top of my head if the reviewers, I hope it's the reviewers that would have to be that, but I'm not entirely sure. Don't quote me on that last one, entitlement management, I'm not sure. The big ones I would say they got your sensitivity labels, that is kind of everywhere. I think you might be able to scope identity protection. I'm just trying to think if there's any others, but there is a way of doing it. My recommendation, of course, is always play with the technology first and scope it to a group of users. A lot of these things can be scoped, so get one license, start turning it on. You can test with a handful of users, and I don't think Microsoft would ever know. Is the easy answer.
With unified labels, you can have 2 policies, one with automatic labeling.
Yep. Okay, yeah, you could do that way, and you could. No, it's all right. The gentleman over here has a good point. We could do 2 sets of labels, one with kind of automatic and one with manual classification. So you might be able to do it that way as well. Yeah. So yeah, there are ways and means. It's more just scoping it out and trying to figure out who should have access to what, really.
Any more questions before we let you all go for lunch?
Oh yeah. Swag.
Oh.
By all means, you crack on, sir.
Right, thanks very much, everyone, for joining the session. Thank you very much to the remote attendees. We're just ironing out a snag we've got with getting in some questions from the remote audience. So we'll do that for the next session. So bear with us, please. Thank you very much, and enjoy the sessions this afternoon to the